Morning, everybody. Going to introduce two guys. Their names are Mark and Joe. I don't have anything on what particular to say on them. I couldn't take notes. So Mark and Joe, you on? You got the floor. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. My name is Mark Daniels. I work with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. We're going to talk today about the Tribal Pesticide Program Council, or TPPC. The title of the talk being Promoting the Responsible Use of Pesticides to Protect Tribal Lands and Communities. So the way this will work is I'll be giving kind of an introduction to the TPPC and talking about kind of what we do, what sort of issues we work with and things like that. And then I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Joe Herrera from the Yakama Nation, to talk about his experience as a Region 10 member of the TPPC. So with that, I'm going to get started here. So let's go to the next slide, please. So the TPPC, or Tribal Pesticide Program Council, as I said, it was established in 1997 with support from the EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs. And the purpose of the council is to be a tribal pesticide or tribal technical resource, and also to do kind of program policy development and focusing specifically, of course, on pesticide issues and concerns, and looking at both agricultural pesticide use and also structural. So, dealing with things like termites or cockroaches or mice or bed bugs and things like that. So the TPPC assists tribes in building tribal pesticide programs, and as well as providing pesticide education and training, and also researching, developing, and presenting a broad range of tribal pesticide related issues and concerns. The group also serves as a liaison between tribes and the EPA, both to inform tribes of upcoming regulatory actions, and then also to go the other direction and provide tribal input back to the EPA to inform their decision-making about pesticide-related issues as well. The council is funded through a cooperative agreement with the EPA. It's on a 5-year cycle, and since October, a year and a half ago, right, basically, my institute, the ITAP, or Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, has had that cooperative agreement. We do want to stress, kind of relevant to the last presentation a little bit too, we do want to stress that this group is not a substitute for government-to-government consultation. It doesn't serve as a primary mechanism for communications between tribes and the EPA on pesticide matters, and the maintenance of direct contact between the two is strongly supported by the TPPC. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. So as far as membership and governance of the group, it's made up of individuals from tribes and tribal organizations like consortia across the country. We're currently comprised of 73 members from 44 tribes and tribal organizations. And I want to say members don't have to be pesticide control officers or inspectors, although many of them are. They just need to be folks who are interested in pesticide issues and want to make a difference in their communities. To become an authorized member of the TPPC, a person needs a letter from their tribal leadership or organization leadership authorizing them to represent the group. And the numbers above that I showed, that 73 and 44, that includes both authorized members as well as others who participate in the group without having that letter for their tribe or organization. And I also want to point out, we don't currently have any members from Alaska. So if anyone on this call from Alaska works with pesticides or is interested in pesticides and their effects on people in the environment, please let me know if you're interested in getting involved. We'd love to have more members and more people participating. The group is governed by an executive committee, which is made up of a chair and co-chair, or vice chair, actually, I guess, representatives from each of the 10 EPA regions, and then plus a separate representative from Alaska when we have members from Alaska. Right now that's vacant. And 4 at-large representatives as well. So there's a total of 17, a maximum of 17 folks that can be on the executive committee, although we do often have a couple of gaps based on not having members in those areas currently or whatever. The group is, the executive committee members are elected for 2-year terms, and we just held the elections a couple of months ago for the federal fiscal years 2022 and 2023. I do want to note that only authorized members can actually stand for these elections and vote in these elections as well. Although in general, the group is open to anyone, regardless of whether or not you're an authorized member. Next slide, please. So we have calls and meetings frequently to keep the group engaged and everything. We have executive committee calls every month. These calls, despite the name, they're actually open to anyone. And they pretty much always include presentations by EPA staff or other federal agencies about issues that are relevant to the group. And we've also just recently, for these monthly calls, we've just recently added a closed door tribal caucus session at the beginning of the meetings, where folks from tribes can discuss issues or problems they're having among themselves without having EPA staff or other federal staff on the call as well. So in addition to these monthly calls, we also do full council meetings in person twice a year. Typically, we do one at a tribal facility somewhere around the country, and then the other one is in Washington, D.C., so that we can meet directly with federal officials. Obviously, the last couple of years, our semi-annual meetings have been virtual because of the pandemic, but we are planning our first in-person meeting in 2 years next month in April at the White Earth Nation in Minnesota. And we will have a virtual option as well for people who can't or don't want to travel yet. And the photo there is from our last in-person meeting we had 2 years ago in DC. Next slide, please. So the TPPC works with a variety of collaborators that have common interests in terms of pesticides and the environment and things. We work with the NTOCs, the RTOCs as well, for example, kind of participating in this conference. We work with the EPA's American Indian Environmental Office, or AIEO. We work with the Pesticide Program Dialogue Committee. And then there's a few state issues as well, or state organizations that we work with as well. There's the State FIFRA Issues Research and Evaluations Group, or SFIREG. There's the Association of American Pesticide Control Officers, or APCO, and the Association of Structural Pest Control Regulatory Officials, or ASPCRO. It's a really hard acronym to say. Those last two are basically kind of the state equivalents of the TPPC, and they're broken out into two groups based on whether the APCO works more with agricultural pesticide use and ASPCRO works more with structural pesticide control use. So again, indoor applications. Next slide, please. So the TPPC works with a lot of different issues related to pesticides, and we're constantly revising what we work on, of course, based on what's kind of important to folks at the time. A big focus has been integrated pest management, or IPM, which, if you're not familiar, is essentially mechanisms you can use to try to reduce pesticide use, ways to control pests without having to use chemicals and things. So we've worked a lot with that. We've done some work with the worker protection standard, which are the parts of the pesticide regulations that regulate how protecting agricultural workers and others from pesticides. We've worked a lot with pest control in schools and other tribal facilities, because obviously that's kind of a big issue for a lot of folks. We've worked on certification and training of pesticide inspectors and regulators and things. Endangered species issues, that's a big one. Pesticide drift, structural pesticide use, as I've already mentioned, and agricultural use. We've done some specific work with bed bugs, and I'll talk in the next slide a little bit about that. And then in addition to these kind of specific issues we work on, we also have 3 work groups that meet monthly to talk about larger kind of broad topics that the group's really interested in. Pollinator protection is one of those, and it's probably the most popular of the work groups. We've got a lot of members on that one. There's a lot of folks who are really interested in and concerned about pollinators, particularly native pollinators, not just like honeybees, but bumblebees and various ground-dwelling bees and flies and butterflies and things. So we have a lot of folks that work on that one. And then we have 2 other ones as well. Risk assessment is one. I know this was mentioned in the last presentation a little bit, or the last talk a little bit as well. That's how the EPA determines what levels of pesticide residues are acceptable on food and things. And there's some issues there with tribal lifeways not necessarily being taken into concern in these risk assessments. So we've got a work group working on that to try to improve the way these risk assessments are done to better reflect tribal lifeways and cultural uses of plants and things. And then finally, direct implementation as well. We have a group that works on that. So the implementation of regulations on tribal lands, either by the EPA directly or through the tribe through cooperative agreements. Next slide, please. So the assistance TPPC provides to tribes is we do a lot of pesticide education, research, program development, kind of trying to help ensure, particularly that tribes with less experience with the issue or less capacity to kind of regulate things and stuff, so they can develop mentoring or coaching relationships with more experienced tribes. The group is fully aware that not all tribes have established pesticide monitoring, enforcement, or regulatory programs, and some may not have the information or capacity necessary to determine if they should develop a pesticide program. So we really try to work on that and provide resources to tribes to be able to develop pesticide programs and regulations and monitoring and things like that if they would like to do so. We also put together a variety of informational resources, such as the bedbug educational package. There's a little photo of the cover of that from a few years ago, and other things like that to help tribes address common pest problems. We provide training and webinars on various subjects of interests to the TPPC members. We also have a quarterly newsletter with feature articles, upcoming events, TPPC contact lists, and more. We have an email listserv that we use to distribute information about the group and pesticide issues. And finally, we have, of course, a website with lots of valuable information on tribes and pesticides. And I'll give information on how to get involved with all of those and how to find the website and things at the end. Next slide, please. And in terms of the TPPC engagement with the EPA and other federal agencies, we've worked on a variety of white papers and issue papers on various topics, including persistent organic pollutants, tribal pesticide training needs, concerns about cannabis cultivation on tribal lands. That's a big one we're working on right now. We've also provided comments on impending regulatory actions. The most recent one was last year. We did supplied some comments to the USDA as they were proposing to deregulate multiple pesticide-resistant GMO corn. We've also worked with the comments on the EPA Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurances Cooperative Agreement guidance, as well as the EPA strategic plan. And then EPA tribal pesticide team members attend all of our TPPC calls and meetings. And like I said, to serve as that kind of liaison role to help us, pass information up to the EPA and back down to the tribes again as well. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, thank you. And the last big work product I do want to mention, because it was kind of a big deal. In October of 2020, the TPPC put out a report called the Status of Pesticides in Indian Country report. This was a lot of work, took almost a couple of years of work, and it happened before ITEP got involved, so I'm not claiming any ownership of this. But it's a great document. It's about 60 pages, a little over 60 pages. It describes and discusses a lot of the major pesticide-related issues that tribes are facing, and details a series of steps that EPA can take to try to improve problematic areas as well. So the report was passed out to lots of different policymakers at various different levels of the EPA to inform them of the issues that tribes are facing with regard to pesticides and pesticide use. And in fact, when the new presidential administration came in at the beginning of last year, we also kind of put together like a 2-page little summary of this document as well, and that distributed that really widely to a lot of folks in the new administration to try to get them up to speed. And the TPPC does plan to update the report periodically to reflect, the most recent issues, the most important to tribes. So we're actually getting started on that soon to try to do the next version of that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the end of my part here. I do want to say, if you're interested in getting involved, we'd love to have any new members or just people sitting in on our calls and listening to things and trying to figure out if they want to become members. You can check out our website there, pretty easy, tppcwebsite.org. You can email me or contact me by phone. You can join one of our monthly executive committee calls if you'd like. They're typically on the third Wednesday of every month from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. I do need to note that the one for this month for March was actually moved to the fourth Wednesday of the month, March 23rd, due to a scheduling conflict. But otherwise, they're pretty much always on the third Wednesday of the month. And you can also subscribe to our listserv if you'd like to stay informed. We send out maybe 3 to 5 emails a week, so it's probably not going to fill up your inbox, but it'll give you some information, good information if you're interested in it. So feel free to reach out to me if you would like to get any of those things. So thank you for your attention. I do want to now hand off the presentation to Joe Herrera from the Yakima Nation. to talk about his experience as a Region 10 TPPC member.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Hi, my name is Joe Herrera. I work with the Yakima Nation. I'm the FIFRA inspector for the tribe. I've been an inspector since 2016 and same as a TPPC member since 2016. I was an at-large representative for Region 10 for 4 years, and this year was elected to be the representative for Region 10. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for listening in on what we have to say about TPPC. It's a great organization. When I first got on with the tribe, I didn't really have a grasp on pesticides at all, really. I just knew they were chemicals. And then my boss wanted me to have my credentials done within 6 months. And so that was part of our agreement, and I was able to obtain my credentials and been an inspector ever since. We have probably 64,000 acres of farmland here on the reservation. And so, you know, we have a lot of growers and a lot of chemicals rolling through the reservation, and with pollinator protection. We have farm bees, honeybees, apples, orchards, corn, hops is a big thing. And then just last year, a year and a half ago, I found a hemp farm that was growing, but they had something with the tribe, and I don't know how they got it figured out. It's under their jurisdiction, I guess, ours, but it's, I don't know. Anyways, difficult area. But the TPPC has really helped me with finding resources and being able to contact people that were similar situations as me, being a new inspector, or they were old inspectors and they're giving me guidance. And so it was it's a really good network. And so to be in with the tribes. So as of COVID, when COVID first broke out, our department was given, we were COVID relief team. So we're in our cultural center right now, and you can see all of our supplies that we handed out to COVID victims. So with that, I just hope I talked enough about TPPC and what they've done. You know, I mean, with bed bugs on our reservation, our structural pesticides, all the whole spectrum of pesticides, really, from growing to structural to putting out traps and simple things. So, but yeah, thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to me mumble on.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We'd like to open it up for a couple of questions. So we have a question in the room from Shauna.
Hello again. I spent many years working on persistent organic pollutants, also known as POPs, the Stockholm Convention, traveled all over the world, and of course, I'm disappointed to hear that we are lacking in Alaska representation in terms of this committee. I wondered what this group is doing about alternatives and how they educate, as well as phasing out the use of these toxic chemicals. You know, I think it's very different in the lower 48 than it is to Alaska because of the land issue and reservations, reserves. We don't necessarily have the types of issues with the agriculture and that sort of thing that tribes in the lower 48 have. But what we do have is the fact that these persistent organic pollutants can travel from miles and miles. So one of the things I learned when working on the Stockholm Convention is that when they spray DDT in South Africa to try to tamp down the mosquito problem, it only takes 10 days for that DDT that's sprayed to leave South Africa and migrate all the way to Alaska. And we're actually finding that DDT in our breast milk and in the animals and in the plants and all over. And so my question really is, how close is the United States to signing on to the Stockholm Convention? Obviously, there's lots of countries that have come around from around the world to decide that we got to phase these toxic chemicals out. And also just wanting to touch on the idea of risk assessment and remind people that as sovereign nations with self-determination, tribes should really have the authority to create their own risk assessment and also help people understand that risk assessment is done on an individual chemical basis, chemical by chemical. So we're not talking about what happens when we combine all those chemicals. We're not talking about what happens when we drink coffee and those beans were sprayed with pesticides. We're not talking about how there's pesticides in the creamer that we're using in our coffee. We're not talking about all the pesticides that are used on the flour that is coming into our villages. We're not talking about those things. We're not talking about how expensive it is to buy organic in the village, if that's an option, because usually it's not. And so just wanting to make sure that this committee is taking into full consideration all of the different issues that we would face. When I started this work 20 years ago, I went to South Africa with a gentleman from the State Department, John Thomas, and I went with people over the years like, Deb Abrahamson and Twila and all of the different, Shelley Vindiola. I've worked with so many people from this area, this region, from these lands that we're standing on. And so I hope that the tribes in the lower 48 that are representing these issues will remember your relatives up north in Alaska.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's kind of a lot there, so I'll address as much as I can remember here. And Joe, feel free to chime in and help me if I miss anything. As far as the Stockholm Convention, I really don't know. That's not something I'm actually incredibly familiar with. I've heard of it, and I know it's a little bit about what it has to do. My guess, just kind of gut feeling, is that the U.S. is probably not super close to signing on to it, just because big agriculture and stuff have a fair bit of influence on politics and things. But I hope I'm wrong on that. I will say the TPPC is definitely looking at a lot of those issues. We have folks right now who are serving on national committees, national tribal committees on PFAS and PFAS issues, as well as other persistent organic pollutants. We do, our role is not, well, we do a little bit of advocacy, but our role is largely educational. So we try to get people on committees and things, and then produce issue papers and try to put stuff on our website to provide information for folks. As far as the issue with the lower 48 tribes and the current lack of Alaska representation on there, like I said, we would love to have folks from anyone from Alaska, get involved with us and be able to help kind of further those goals. I don't know, Joe, do you happen to remember? I know there have been people from Alaska in the past, but I'm not sure when the most recent, when we used to have somebody from Alaska.
Yeah, ever since I've been with the TPPC, we haven't had no Alaskan representatives, and that's in 2016. So. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. As far as the risk assessments, we are doing a lot with that. Like I said, we have this work group that works on those issues. The big thing we're trying to work on right now, as I kind of mentioned a little bit in my presentation, is to modify the way the risk assessments are done to take into account tribal lifeways, tribal cultural practices, gathering, hunting, basket weaving, all sorts of things like that. And so we're actually, the EPA has just recently announced that they're going to be working with us on a pilot project to try to do surveys of some tribes to start getting that kind of data. Because the big issue with improving those risk assessments is it means giving up data so that the EPA can actually analyze it and take that into account when they revise their risk assessments. But then you deal with issues of tribal data sovereignty as well, and tribes not wanting to necessarily have their data get out there and be used for something that they didn't approve of it, because obviously that's happened in the past. So we're working on that right now, and we're starting to get some movement with the EPA as far as doing some of these pilot studies. But we would always love to have more input as well from other people and other tribes, other groups, and what their particular cultural lifeways are affecting those things. And then in terms of, you mentioned as well that tribes being sovereign nations should do their own risk assessments. We actually had a really nice presentation at our last in-person meeting back in the fall from a tribe in Maine, where they actually are doing some of that stuff. They're doing their own risk assessments. They're setting their own advisory levels for like fish consumption and things like that in terms of pesticides and other chemicals in the fish from the water quality and everything. So that's a really neat area, and I'd love to see more work done on that. So we would love to partner with other tribes who are interested in doing those kinds of things for their own reservations, for their own homelands, and then maybe try to make that available to other tribes so that tribes can be, hey, this is something we could do as well. So anyway, I hope I at least touched on most of the things you asked about. I don't know, Joe, is there anything else you wanted to add to that? Or
I just know with trying to gear away from pesticides or pesticide use, we do a lot of outreach, like with the bed bug packet. That packet, I was able to work on that packet and be a part of that paper, and so it was really nice to have, because it was showing, I could show our tribal people on ways that they could probably properly manage them, and then geared towards getting rid of the problem and doing it without chemicals, or maybe heat treatments, or simple ways that we never thought of, and other experts in the area that gave presentations or talks during our meetings. This is where we got our ideas from, or the resources available to pass out to tribal members. And then with like drift, I was part of a toolkit paper with that, and that was a big thing, because we do aerial applications here on the reservation, and so I do get complaint calls, and I respond to them, and so, but we always try to go towards a non-pesticide form chemical use with all of our things, or that we talk about. So
Awesome. Well, thank you. We have one more quick question from in the room from Bill.
Hi, it's more of a comment. Thanks, guys, for the information, and I appreciate working with you on the NTALK and the RTALK. I wanted to encourage our Alaskan tribes to put someone forward. I believe this is going to be more of a relevant situation for Alaska with climate change, our roots and our berries and our plant structures slowly changing. So we're looking at food security issues and growing more food. So this will become more relevant to Alaskans as the climate change. So I'm just want to encourage my tribes to put someone forward and take part in this group and let our voices be heard. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. We really appreciate
I wanted to say also, everybody knows me by Cricket, so thanks, Raymond.